Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone, honored guests, friends, fellow thinkers, and many old friends who have been working together in the past few years. We're meeting today. Allow me to express my appreciations. Thank you very much for having me in this conference of a community that is of not my department when I did my undergraduate. I was trained as an economist. I did my graduate programs in public policies and political science and had the opportunity to work with many architects, so I'm truly honored. It is indeed a pleasure to join all of you. And this is a place where architecture is not only discussed. I believe this is a place where architecture is also being questioned and challenged and perhaps reimagined. So allow me to say that even though in the introduction I was mentioned as former governor, but I'm here not as a former governor, but as someone who deeply believes that cities are living tanks and that architects help us in reading and in writing them so that we can have a city that we can provide rooms for dialogues. I come to speak about a different way of imagining our cities, not just as physical settlements, but as civic performances, as it was mentioned earlier about the topics. But before I go further, allow me to reflect a moment about some of the principles that I deeply believe in. It is a principle of social justice and equality, driven from the 5 principles of Pancasila. The 5th principle, which is the most fundamental promise of Indonesians' independence, is social justice and equality, and it is the guiding star of our Pancasila. This ideology, this approach, these values has shaped every roles and every decisions I've taken throughout my career. And I'm outlining this at the beginning because I'm not speaking again as a former governor, but as someone who cares about the future of urban cities. When I served as rector of Paramadina University, I realized that beyond the campus, behind Jakarta's grand avenues, there are neighborhoods who are struggling with poverty. It's hard to accept that a place of learning would exist in an isolation from its surrounding. So we created a scholarship program specifically for children of our neighbors. We have no constitutional duty to do that. We were a private university. But with that, high school graduates in our neighbors able to go to our university at no cost. So we do hope that university could also become space for social repair. And then we look at the archipelago of Indonesia. Let's think beyond the city. It's about the deep gaps across our nations, the distance between urban centers and remote villages is not just spatial. The difference is it's about distance of opportunity. That's why we initiated a project called Indonesia Mengajar. It's a movement to send the nation's brightest university graduates to the remote area, to the most remote area of Indonesia. So sending a graduate of aeronautics from ITB to Kapuas Hulu. Let me give you illustrations going to Kapuas Hulu. 1 hour flight from Jakarta to Pontianak, 26 hours by bus to Kapuas Hulu, 5 hours by boat, and then another hour by motorcycles to reach the village. So So you can go to London back and forth, and you're not there yet. Just to give you illustrations. Why that is the case, we want to ensure that we are part of those who want to make sure that the gap of opportunity can be narrowed. So I continued responsibility. I serve as Minister of Education, and again, we launched a project called Guru Garis Depan, a civil service initiative that places permanent, well-supported teachers in the frontiers, in the outmost and the most disadvantaged regions in our archipelago. These teachers were not designed simply to teach, simply for being an educator, but they're designed to be community leaders in the long run, anchoring the presence of the states where it had long been struggling to fulfill. So, when I was entrusted to serve as governor in Jakarta, I brought the same compass with me, which is social justice, both as directions and also as destination. I'll speak more in a moment about how we tried to apply this principle through the tools of architecture and urban design. But let me first offer some context to many of you who may not be familiar with Jakarta. Jakarta is one of the most densest cities in the world. It is a home over 11 million people. It has one of the highest level of inequality in Southeast Asia, with a Gini index that hover around 0.4, and nearly half of its workforce is in the informal sectors, and about 1/5 of its residents live in poverty or near poverty. Therefore, any conversations about design in a city like Jakarta must begin with these realities. But on the other hand, Jakarta is also one of the most spatially fragmented cities in the region. Wealth and infrastructures were heavily concentrated in the centers and the south, while the north and west were struggling with chronic underinvestment, especially in housing, drainage, and green space. And when we come about the gap, the top is at par with those in many modern megapolitans across the globe, but those who are below were struggling deeply. So these spatial divides mirror social ones, but they're often reinforced by our design, by our regulations. And access to public services remain uneven. While some enjoy world-class hospitals, world-class schools, many others rely on overstretched public facilities and often located far from their homes. Give you an example. More than 25% of Jakarta's residents live in a neighborhood classified by the UN Habitat Standard as slum-like, and this is 25%. Where basic infrastructures like clean water, proper sanitations, or safe sidewalks are still lacking. So these experiences, how my life journey has been, and how I view this reality of the city, shape myself, seeing the city not simply as technical object. I saw the city of Jakarta as a moral and cultural landscape. A city is not only a place to live, but also a place to belong. And in a country as vast and as diverse as Indonesia, we cannot design cities with only engineering in mind. We must design with imaginations, because our geography demands that imaginations. Now, let me give you the Indonesian context here. When we talk about Indonesia, let's not begin with maps. But let's start with metaphor. Indonesia is indeed an archipelago, but not only in terms of its geography, but it is also an archipelago in terms of imaginations. Our cities are shaped not by linear logic, but by tides, ritual, oral traditions, and islands of memory. And therefore, urban design in such a place cannot follow one-size-fits-all approach. It must be humble enough to listen and bold enough to express. So today, in these great opportunities, I'd like to offer a provocations. One that may sound philosophical, but actually it is deeply practical. What if we treated cities not merely as space to occupy, but as stage to perform who we are? What if we look at cities in a different way? What if sidewalks, parks, and transit system could speak, could express values like justice, equality, belongings? Can you imagine what would it means to design for that performance, where all the facilities were expressing those values? You know, we often talk about smart cities, green cities, sustainable cities, livable cities, but rarely we talk about cities that speaks. Cities that move not just bodies, but move souls. Cities that allow disagreement. Cities that provide celebrations and allow silence to coexist in their public spaces. That's the spirit of what I'd like to share with you today. The idea of performative archipelago. Now, why this matters a lot? Indonesia is not a single landmass. It is a constellation of island, culture, and rhythm of life. And each island has its own tempo, it has its own stories, and its own way of relating to space. In this archipelago, the idea of urban cannot be copied and pasted from a continental model. Our geography demands a different imagination. Each city in Indonesia is more than just a cluster of buildings. Each city is a stage, shaped by climate, shaped by history, shaped by rituals. Therefore, a city by the sea breathes differently than a city in the mountains. A marketplace in Sumatra may carry different social codes than a plaza in Sulawesi. So urbanism here must be rooted in the locals and not imposed from the top. Yet, too often, urban planning in Indonesia follows templates designed elsewhere. We build malls, highways, mega projects that may work in other contexts but feel alien here. As a result, many of our cities grow outward but lose its souls. They become disconnected, not just from each other, but from the people they're meant to serve. Public life, which should invite life, often become controlled, fenced, and forgotten. It's public space. Instead of enabling gathering, expressions, or contemplations, many urban public spaces become either hostile or hollow. When that happens, a city becomes quiet, There's two kind of quiet. Quiet because it's peaceful, or quiet because it is disengaged. What worrisome is most of the hollow and quiet because it is disengaged. And therefore we lose the chance to be moved by our own surroundings. However, given this diversity, this complexity, allow me to say that Indonesian complexity is not a challenge to be simplified. I'm not here to say that we need to simplify this. No, it is a richness to be embraced, and our diversity should be seen not as noise to reduce, but as music to orchestrate. Cities then should not be designed to standardize identity, but to host differences, and this requires a shift from mechanical urbanisms into performative urbanism. We need a new urban logic, one that fits the soul of an archipelago, not just roads and regulations, but rituals and relationships. A logic where cities are not just built, but performed on daily basis. And performed by who? By the people who live in them. And this is the spirit of performative archipelago. But allow me to underline here that performative archipelago is not a master plan, but it is a mindset. It is a way of designing cities as living stage for public life, rather than just mechanical containers for zoning and movement. It asks us to see the city not just built form, but as social performance. It starts from the belief that space is never neutral, and I stand strongly on this, that space never neutral. Every sidewalks, plaza, bridges, or kampung, it says something through its design, through its accessibility, through its mood. Cities will either invite people to be in or push people to be away. That's a choice. They either speak dignity or silence. So in a country like Indonesia, with thousands of islands and cultures, urban design must respect differences. Each place has its own climate, memory, materials, and rhythm. So performative urbanism embraces that plurality. It does not try to force uniformity across islands, but it choreographs their coexistence. And performative urbanism places value not only in the aesthetics, but in rituals. So morning gatherings, evening markets, parade, even student protests, street musics, all of these are civic performances, and a good city gives space for all of them to happen freely and safely. Having said that, this is not a rejection of structure or system, yet it is a call to rehumanize them. That street still must move traffic, but can also host poetry. Transit must connect destinations, but it has to connect people too. This is what makes a city not just efficient, but a city that is meaningful. So performative archipelago is also a critic of what we might call mechanical urbanisms, a model of city building that focuses solely on function, regulations, and control, and often at the expense of soul, context, and participation. In many places, this has created cities that work, but those cities may not breathe. We need the cities that works and breathe. So what exactly is the difference between mechanical and performative urbanisms? Next slide, please. Here's a simple table to illustrate the shift that we are proposing from mechanical to performative urbanisms. On the dimensions of philosophy of space, space is a container of functions. Transform it into space as a stage for meaning and relationship. And then the goal of the design, efficiency, order, control. Transform it into expression, inclusion, connection. Public space roles. From about movement and regulations into gathering, storytellings, and democratic presence. From the user perspective, the user being passive to users being active and co-author of the city. Perhaps in the discussion I can elaborate further about this collaboration approach. And that's why Jakarta is called the city of collaborations. It's coming in from that principle of active participation of its residents. And then about visual language, from neutral, standardized, and placeless into contextual, symbolic, and rooted in local identity. Next slide. What about response to diversity? In the mechanical urbanism, it's standardized and simplified. In a performative urbanisms, it actually celebrates and choreograph differences. Planning logic from top-down technocratic into collaborative, narrative-driven, and more eclectic, more creative. About time orientations, from future-focused and often ahistorical into layered with memory, but responsive to presence. What about the examples of its output? Gated complexes, flyovers, and sterile plazas. That's the mechanical urbanisms. Into activated parks, plural sidewalks, reimagined kampungs. And if I am allowed to give a metaphor, in the mechanical urbanism, city as a machine. In the performative urbanism, city as performance. So this table is not a rejection of engineering, it is a reminder to add meanings. We still need infrastructures, we still need drainage, we still need transport, but we also need delight, we also need dignity, we also need dialogues. So the challenge is not either or. I think the challenge is both. It's an and, A and D. We need to combine these transformations. In the performative archipelago, we do not build for silence. We build for resonance, for voices to echo, from stories to be shared, for difference to be visible. So our city not just rise, but our city must perform. The idea of performative urbanism is not just theoretical. Allow me to say that it has been tested on the ground. During my tenure as governor of Jakarta, we tried to shift how city relates to its people from control to invitations, from utility to meanings. These projects were not perfect, and we never claim it's perfect, but we were sincere in attempting to let the city speak, to let the city provide its space, its people, its stories to be core of our conversations. What follows here are not showcases, but these are just illustrations of different urban ethnics. So I'll go through with you some of our illustrations, how this concept is being adapted in Jakarta. But before I go further, allow me to say that there are so many projects that we engage on. There are two groups here. One, we look at cultural expression spaces, that's group one, and group two is everyday justice space. So cultural expression space are public area designed or revitalized to encourage gathering, to encourage creativity and civic voice. That's one. Two is a place where everyday justice space that were designed to help restore dignity, restore access, and restore people who are often left out at the margin of urban growth. Both, they show how performance can take place in many forms. Some of these spaces host musics and others host daily life, quiet dignity, or resilience. But what unites them is not their shape, but their spirit. They create possibilities. They invite people to use the city, not just pass through the city. They turn urban design into dialogue, not urban design simply as directive. The first one, on cultural expression space. Jalan Sudirman and Terowongan Kendal. This was once car-dominated corridor. It was pedestrianized and open for public expressions. From Musik Tepi Barat, performed every Friday late afternoon till early evening, to Citayam Fashion Week. From skateboarders to Christmas carolers. And also rooms for protesters to be there. So the space now performs pluralisms. It performs freedom. It is a civic noise, it's a civic voice. This has taught us that when people were trusted with space, they fill it with life. They fill it with meaning. That's example number one. Next one, Kota Tua. This is a historic old town of Jakarta that was not just preserved, but reactivated as public stage. So festivals, night markets, street performances, and many spontaneous gatherings now bring new energy to the old stones that has been there for centuries. The space now performs historical dialogue, connecting colonial memory with contemporary citizenship. Next example, Taman Literasi Marta Tiahahu. It's a park for quiet resistance. It is built in the heart of Commercial District, Block M. This park offers books, open reading space, sittings for reflections and discussions, and it performs slow culture. It performs intellectual invitations and reminding that the city is also about silence. City is also about thoughtfulness. And those two, silence, thoughtfulness, is also public expressions that need to be respected. And this area gives young people and families a place to learn, to linger, and to dream. Just as an illustration, Taman Ismail Marzuki. It was revitalized not as mall, but as platform for the arts. Theme was designed to reclaim the city creative voices, with the new Jakarta Library serve as its core, and the space now performs creative dignity, knowledge access, and artistic freedom. This is not just a venue. This is a civic declaration that culture is essential. Culture is not optional. Now, we are talking about the second one, everyday justice space. Kampung Aquarium. Once affected, once erased, even the residency status was deleted from our administrations in the governor's office. This coastal kampung was rebuilt through participatory planning with its original resident. It performs what we call restorative justice, turning architecture into an act of apology, turning architecture into an act of inclusion. And the result is not only housing, but the result is a statement. You were never invisible. You belong here, and we will ensure you can stay here. It's a message. Kampung Gembira Gembrong. It was rebuilt from ashes. I had the opportunity to meet one of the architects here just a few minutes before I start my session. She was involved in this project. It was burned down. The entire kampung burned down by fire. April 2022. Gone. Everything. And then this dense kampung was revitalized. And it was revitalized as a child-friendly, as a colorful and playful neighborhood. It performs urban care, using designs to heal trauma, to restore dignity to everyday life. And by the way, there are so many legal challenges with regard to the status of the land, as always in many other spaces in Jakarta. But if you have clear ideology in your mind, you can translate that into policy that ensure justice is served. So the joy is visible not just in the walls today, but in the faces of the children who now play safely in their own street, in that very kampung. Next illustrations. This is a world-class field, open for every child. In Jakarta's most crowded neighborhood, open spaces were crafted to build completely free community football field. I even asked the team to clearly state it, that this football field tidak untuk dikomersialkan. Biarkan anak-anak dari semua kalangan rakyat bisa berlatih dan bermain di sini. This is for years to come, because government tend to collect money from all of this. It has to be free, and it has to be forever free. So these spaces perform aspirations and belonging. It is giving young people a stage to grow, a stage to play, a stage to be seen, and a stage to feel. How does it feel being a soccer player in the world-class field in a very dense kampung in Jakarta? So they remind us that equality can be performed through something as simple yet as profound as the right to play. Another example, revitalized pedestrian bridges. We remember once dark, narrow, neglected, many pedestrian bridges were transformed with lighting, colors, and public arts. They now perform civic safety and visibility. These places offering not just passage, but presence. For many, these bridges become a daily reminder that the city sees and values its pedestrians. Another example, Jaklingko, the transport integration in Jakarta. You know, integrating Transjakarta, MRT, LRT, microtransit under a unified system. Let me underline, it was not just a logical achievement, it was a civic one. Jaklingko performed what we call urban equity, allowing people from different walk of life to move together with ease and respect. In the city that, as I mentioned at the beginning, is often shaped by class boundaries, segregations in practice, in reality, not in the planning, but in the reality. So the act of riding side by side become a quiet performance of solidarity. Imagine someone who served as a board of directors of a top corporations in an MRT sit next to an office boy and being done on regular basis. So we clearly explain to everyone, public transport is not to move bodies of people from one place to another, but public transport as means to build unity in our society. So it was a social engineering in a way. So these examples from Jakarta, which I give the illustrations, allow me to underline, this is not meant to be copied. They're meant to be understood. The goal is not replications. The goal is reflection. What matters is not the forms of the park or the shape of the bridge, but the principle behind it. That space can express care, space can restore justice, and space can invite people to belong. Allow me to encourage all of us here that each city across this archipelago must find its own way to perform its values. So Jakarta is only one voice in a much larger chorus. Across Indonesia and beyond, each city has its own questions to ask, its own stories to tell. So the challenge is not to imitate what we did here in Jakarta, but allow me to say, the challenge is to adapt the principle of performative urbanism to your own context with humility, creativity, and context. I believe that as architects and urban thinkers, you all were not simply shaping forms, but you are shaping feelings, shaping memory, and shaping citizenship. You do not design what is, but you also suggest what could be. In a diverse archipelago, that responsibility becomes even greater. You're not decorating space, but you are directing a performance of everyday democracy in our city. Therefore, allow me to say that this is a call to build with meaning, not just metrics. And of course, we need data, we need cost efficiency, we need compliance. But a good city is not only measured by traffic flow or floor area ratio, but also measured by how it feels to walk in, who gets to sit down, and whether the quiet are allowed to speak. My time is almost up. Let me speed it up. So design with memory is not just materials, but we need to ask what stood here before, who was displaced, who was ignored. Buildings can stand tall and yet still be hollow. But even a small and a modest space can become sacred if we listen to its history and honor its people. So design with pluralism, not perfections. The archipelago is not symmetrical, and our city shouldn't be either. So a good urban space allows for contradictions, for improvisations, and for unplanned beauty. So let your work make room for things you didn't expect. Design with dignity, not dominance. Grand entrances and imposing structures were not always sign of greatness, but sometimes what people need is a shaded bench, a clean path, or a place to dance at sunset. These are small gestures often carry a large meaning. I believe in every city there are voices waiting to be heard. The child looking for a place to play, the elder looking for a place to remember, the migrants were looking for a place to belong. So a city that works well is not enough. We need cities that speaks back. We need cities that listen. We need cities that feels. We do not need louder cities. We need more resonant ones. Cities that don't just echo steels and glass, but also echoing memory, echoing rituals, and echoing sad hope. Cities that perform justice in how they welcome and perform kindness in how they endure. Cities that help us become more fully human, and we all becoming humanized together. In this archipelago, every island deserves a city that understands its souls. Not an imposed vision, but a grounded expression. Not a sterile efficiency, but a generous public life. And let me underline, this is not an idealism. This is urbanism with integrity. So let us not only build what stands, but also build what stays. Not only what can be measured, but what can be remembered. As designers, as planners, and as thinkers of space, you carry the tools of constructions, but also instruments of collective expressions. Let this be our shared ambitions in this archipelago. Let our city not only rise, but allow our cities to resonate. Let cities be performance worth living in. So allow me to end this to the organizers of ARCS ID 2025. Thank you for creating a space where architecture is not only exhibited, but also questioned and reimagined. This forum reminds us that design is not only about visions, but design is also about listening, about asking better questions before offering bold solutions. And I'm truly grateful to be part of this shared inquiry, this noble endeavor, and to all of you, my fellow friends, architects, urban planners, students, community organizers. Allow me to use the stage to express my appreciation. Thank you for all the work you have done, often unseen but deeply felt. You build more than structures, but what you have done, you build stories, connections, and futures. May you continue to design not only what is functional, but what is felt. And may your work always begin with care. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.